Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Realtor Reacts. On the screen today is exactly what I promised last week. This is Mr. Gary Abbott once again. We will be doing other content other than Gary's, but I was pre-watching this one. I got really excited about it. It is a 20-minute video, so I'm going to keep my commentary to a relatively minimal amount. Right out the gate, um, I noticed that the content he has in his hand there is distributed by Properties of the Villages. That's a Villages Inc. Kind of introduction dream guide, and this looks like the uh, magazine that is published. I want to say monthly or bi-monthly, or not bi-monthly, but semi-annually. Okay, let's go ahead and hop in here and see what Mr. Abbott has to say about buying in the villages.
Ever wonder how to buy a house in the villages? It's a little different than everywhere else when you try to buy a house. And I will give you some tips on how to purchase in the villages. And it's different than in your local neighborhood if you are not living in the villages. So let's get to it. So, you want to get a house in the villages. You've been there. I'm assuming that you've taken the time to visit and you've decided that that's where you want to buy. Now, I've been through this experience in 2021, so I want to share my experience.
Okay, so a couple quick things. He's absolutely right on all these points thus far. It is different than pretty much anywhere else you purchased. Um, it's a very unique experience. Um, and yes, you probably do want to visit once or twice. The part I really appreciate about what he said there is that you've made a decision that the villages is where you want to be. That's kind of step two in the process. So let's keep going.
Make sure that you visited at least once to know what is the basic concept. The place is big, so you need to know some really critical things before you are going to buy. Hopefully, you understand what the villages are or is. It's a 55 plus community, really based on retirees, and it has some interesting town squares, some pools, some rec centers that make it much more interactive with your neighbors. So, the first thing to know, what is a little bit different, and you want to make sure you know what you can afford. And the reason I say that is because you have your mortgage. Maybe you don't have a mortgage, but you need to know that number. Unlike other places, there's a separate bond that helps.
Okay, so we hear you got to know what you can afford, right? Most of the time when we hear that, we're thinking to ourselves, well, that's dollar amount cap on the price of the home. Um, Beyond that, I would also suggest that we have some idea of what our monthly capabilities are, our month in, month out. A lot of folks are going to have financial advisors in this age group, which is great. I love it. But sometimes that monthly expense is really where we need to be looking in terms of upkeep, in terms of if there's going to be a mortgage, how much strain is that going to put on our cash flow. So um, just a little tidbit to throw in there. He's going to talk about the bond now. This is going to be fun.
Build the infrastructure in your neighborhood and in the villages. And that is a lot like a mortgage that is tacked on in addition to the purchase price. So if you see a house for sale, you need to inquire about what the bond is.
Okay. So this is a an outlook um, that we've been trying to push back against for some time now. The conflating of the bond debt portion as a secondary mortgage product is incorrect. and we really don't want to think about it in those terms. The relation there is that they're both amortized on a payment schedule, and thus they're very similar in terms of how a bond and a mortgage appear and work, but they have nothing to do with one another. The bond derives from the local government system, the CDD. And it does what he says it does. It pays for the initial infrastructure, and that cost then gets disseminated amongst all the home sites within a space. So it has nothing to do with your mortgage. And that's really the trick here. What is he showing us over here? What is this? Oh, this is the median cost of living. There's a all right. This is actually really out of date because the amenities fee here is 164. I'm not sure how old this video is. I should have looked at that. That's not the correct amenities fee currently, and this is based on a median home with homestead exemption. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at the lowest possible expectations to be set, so that we don't scare anybody with what the real cost of living might look at or look like. I don't particularly care for this document. It's not very helpful. Some could argue, some could argue that basic TV is $60. No, no, it's not. Insurance is 100. Okay, sure. Let's go forward. I don't want to spend too much time banging on the cost of living projection there.
Bonds usually at the moment, depending on the size of your home, there's different bond amounts. They're usually in the $20,000 range that's tacked on for your house's contribution to the infrastructure that's required. Then there's the utilities, gas, electric, cable, water is not only in the house you're drinking water, but irrigation system. So on top of that, you really got to think about lawn care and pest control, those other kind of things. But know what you can afford, I think, is the first thing. And know what your Social Security, pensions, all that's going to contribute. I'm not going to go over that. You need to make sure you know that before you start this process. It'll become apparent by the end of the video why you need to know that. Is if you're not ready, you're not going to be in the game. It's a game. It is fight for a given type of property. You most likely will need a village's sale.
It's a fight for a given type of property. I mean, it can be. There are market circumstances in times of the year, scarcity in a particular category of home where it could be challenging. There are always going to be a particular home scenario that is very rare and thus renders more value because of its rarity and its scarcity in the marketplace. Vast majority of the time, um, it's not a multi offer. It's not a fight necessarily. It's simply a matter of understanding what's important to you, and figuring out what life circumstances and timing makes the most sense for your current situation. But he's absolutely right about this. I can't agree with him enough on this point. Having a firm understanding of what you are capable of and what you are trying to achieve, the planning phase, is critical because everything else kind of builds off of that as we're endeavoring to find you the right housing situation here in the villages.
Sales rep, and they're great, but they're different than your regular real estate agent that is kind of like, we have Century 21 and other real estate agents where I live, and they share the sales commission if one lists it, and that still goes on for the older properties, but it doesn't necessarily work that way for when buying directly from the villages. So you may need to figure out who you want as your village's rep.
It looks like when Mr. Abbott filmed this, he had just gotten out of bed too. So he's talking about representative versus realtor. And he just doesn't have the words necessarily to describe what he's trying to say here. Essentially, in the villages, you have two inventories, two primary inventories. You have VLS and MLS. VLS is non cooperating, meaning that they will not pay a commission for the consideration of an MLS agent or a realtor to sell the property. They handle everything in house. It doesn't necessarily go the other way. There is a scenario where a VLS representative or a Properties of the Villages agent could sell an MLS home. There's nothing preventing them from doing that. They just don't engage that as a common practice because they want to maintain the integrity and value of their specialized set aside services. Um, really, what this does is it creates an environment where you're going to wind up with two agents, which is unfortunate because agents look to build relationships, and you probably want to build a solid relationship as well as a consumer. Um, and there's nothing wrong with this per se. I mean, it's going to get a little tricky just because somebody is going to lose, right? You're probably going to like both of your agents, and you can only buy one house. Well, I shouldn't say you can only buy one house. You're probably only going to buy one house. So somebody's going to invest time and energy, and it's just not going to work out for them. That's the nature of the business. It's high risk, it's high reward. So try not to feel too bad about it. I've had situations where folks called me up crying, and it's like, listen, if it was the right house, that's not your fault. That was the seller's decision. The seller elected to list with that agency. Um, there's nothing you could have done. You shouldn't pass on the right home for you just because you would have preferred to purchase from me, right? That's not something we want to get into headspace wise.
Once you know all of those things, it's going to be really apparent that you need to know some basics. When moving from one state to Florida,
Mm-hmm.
the type of home you want. Now, the type of home, we're not talking, you know, um, traditional, modern. We're not talking that type of home. We're talking about structurally. Do you want a block home? You want prefab tilt up concrete walls? Do you want the normal kind of studded aluminum sided home? Those are really your three basic homes that you're going to get to pick from. And they,
I don't know if you can see that or not because this box here where I'm capturing it says not aluminum vinyl siding here. So he corrected himself with the text. That's something I have to do on occasion as well.
clearly, the block is more expensive than the traditional frame home. And so, if you have an opinion of which one you want, then you need to identify that early on in the process.
Yes and no. If you have a strong inclination towards one structural type versus another, um, then of course you're going to let that be known. Um, is it the end of the world? No. I mean, most floor plans have a frame vinyl counterpart. Block and stucco and poured concrete cement, they kind of fall into a similar category. Um, as far as being sought out for resale, block and stucco or poured concrete cement tend to perform better for reasons that are really grounded in risk mitigation, which is more of a perception and somewhat grounded in reality. Um, they are only more expensive because the desire to have one exceeds the inventory, and thus creates a scarcity situation which drives up the value, and the cost of materials is higher, but not by a substantial amount. Usually the variance between the exact same floor plan, albeit it has a different name, um, is usually anywhere from ten to $12,000. So it's not going to necessarily break the bank in a mortgage. Um, let's go ahead and continue here.
The second part is you need to go to the Villages app, which I recommend highly. The Villages app is going to help you get through this process. The next thing I would do is go through the type of homes that they sell. Now, why I'm doing this is because existing homes get listed sometimes through a regular real estate agent, sometimes through the villages, and they appear to be going for more than, say, a comparable value of a brand new home. And this will be up to your judgment and in what neighborhood you want to be in. But I think you need to look at how much square footage do you want? What size garage do you want? Do you want a separate golf cart garage? You got to look at all of those factors and the layout of the home: high ceiling, not high ceiling, open concept, not open concept. Where's the dining room? Is there a nook? 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1 bath. You really need to look at those items, and those will also go with your budget. You probably.
So I want to talk about something very quickly here because it's something that we almost never discuss. Um, you are always encouraged as a consumer to have desires because it drives your motive to sell or to purchase. Um, the counterpoint to that is that the more nuanced items we select, we put into the equation, okay, the less likely we are to find an appropriate property. Um, if you start getting into garage and then you're getting into certain square footages and then you're getting into certain view types or orientations as it pertains to which way the home faces, we start getting into these more nuanced concerns and desires. And as we're doing that, we're shrinking the plausible inventory that for consideration. There is a threshold that if you could cross, which is going to really strongly detriment the likelihood of you finding a home that works for you. Um, all that to say is that sometimes being more flexible helps in your circumstance. With that being said, being too flexible can also be detrimental. We do have to have some kind of parameters, right? I've had customers who will come to me and says, whatever works, works, right? And I'm like, hey, I appreciate that, but I don't know where to look, right? I don't know where to start the search. I don't know what recommendations to give you or what counsel to provide because you don't have any parameters. So I have no idea what's important to you when everything works. Generally that's a position of someone who just hasn't had any real exposure to the home products. I have no problem with this idea of going to the village's website and reviewing the different floor plans and getting a feel for the different product types. I personally have the early education guide. I sit down with my folks and I go over all of this with them and answer these questions. But that's a service that I think I probably uniquely provide for. As a more general approach, there's nothing wrong with this. I will say um, the current floor plan selections at any given time on the village's website are going to be reflective of their new home inventory, the most recent uh, iterations of those plans. So this may not be as helpful to you if you have a strong desire to be anywhere other than in a new home section at that time. If you want to be, somewhere more central or north in the villages, the era of construction there was very different. The selections were very different. I only caution this because I will have folks who will come to me. They will find a floor plan on the internet that they very much like, and they say, "Well, where can we find this over here?" No, it wasn't built over there. So, inevitably you're going to wind up making a choice at some point between, your location preference and your home type preference, or particular floor plan. So just bear that in mind. Um, there's a lot that goes into the purchasing side of things, and we haven't even gotten the contract yet.
Probably not going to get into a designer home with a very low income amount that you're going to pay, because those homes are going for 450, 500,000, a million. Okay, those are much higher. Then you've got your villas that start a little over 200 at the time of this video. You got your cottage homes that make up this other category between 275 and 350, and it depends on the lot. When you get into designer homes, you're picking out a lot that could be 18,000 or it could be 100,000 before you even start your home. On these other ones that are built by the villages and sold as they are finished, and I say finished, they have picked the flooring, they have picked what carpets are going in, they have picked what appliances are going in, what your sink's going to look like, what your showers are going to look like. Um, they've configured these in such a way that they know what works, house that's next to house, how to configure them so that everybody's not looking in everybody's windows. They really know what they're doing. But you need to know the layout, the plan that you want. Do you want a villa? Can you live with 1,000 square feet? Do you need 2,000 square feet? You need to figure that out.
So I'm going to reinforce a point he kind of made earlier, but he didn't bring these two elements together. He started the video off with understand your budgetary constraints, what is comfortable for continuous living, and then later on he went on to say, well, in this segment here where we're talking about deciding what type of home, right? What category of home, patio, villa, courtyard, cottage, designer. He touched on it very briefly, but it's worth kind of reinforcing. Your budgetary means, and a lot of times your intended usage, is going to more or less highlight your housing desire. Okay, and there is some defined elements price wise in these various categories, but then there's also a lot of overlap. Going back to his example about designer homes, right? The designer homes are not uniquely going to have a home site with a home site premium. That's built into the price of pretty much everything. Patio villas are kind of universal, but even there, you have corner sites that are going to be a higher price because you have more land in that situation. But there's very much a situation where, like, a higher end cottage home, I'm trying to think of an example, maybe like a sea breeze, okay, on a nice home site that maybe is catty corner to a wall, a villa wall. That could easily start the price out, particularly if there's any kind of enhancements in it, which there usually isn't. But we're talking pre-owned, we're not talking new. These are different characteristics that tend to go into these houses when they're in different categories. You could easily have a situation where that sea breeze is more expensive, carries a higher value than, say, your entry level jasmine, right? Which is a concrete structure. But if it's a basic jasmine with no real enhancements in it versus a more enhanced sea breeze, which is in a different category, jasmine being designer, sea breeze being cottage, it's very possible that that sea breeze is going to value higher than that jasmine, despite the fact that the designer series theoretically is the higher on the price scale series. So let's not get into this notion that you're going to get priced out of a particular series. You might get priced out of a particular square footage class. That's very possible. You might get priced out of a particular home site scenario. That's very possible. These home site premiums that are kind of built in with the price, when you get into the pre-owned side of things, that's just kind of integrated. You really only notice that on the new home side of the equation, because it's stated as such. But there's intended value there. It's not arbitrary, right? Your interior sites versus your oversized sites versus your corner sites versus your cul-de-sac sites. When you get into cul-de-sac sites, now we're also talking about total dimensionality, right? This home site premium comes from these considerations. So it's not just assignment based on what we think the market will bear out.
Another thing I will tell you is as you narrow what type of house you want, here comes the big one. Where in the villages do you want to live? And I say that because if you pick near a town square that's been fully developed for years, if you pick an old area, there's not going to be new homes, but you're going to have a well developed, you're going to know what the town square looks like and all the rest. If you pick in the southern end that's being developed now, it'll be a few years before some of those town squares or some of those areas and rec centers are completely built. But that can be an advantage. At first, I thought, I don't want to be this far from my favorite town center.
So I understand where Mr. Abbott's opinion is coming from here because Mr. Abbott purchased in 2021, and so a lot of his experience has been around um, Finney, Sector 7, Sector 6, Azalea, um, kind of the southern regions, currently the southern regions of the community. Um, and this was an era of construction in a time where the developer has elected to kind of install the lifestyle elements and facilities as home sales were occurring, right? That's normally the case. That's usually the operating mode. The only exception to that was when Lake Sumter Landing was built. Lake Sumter Landing was built in its totality all at once. A lot of the rec centers were built pre home sales, um, and that seemed to work out real well. There is a aspect of decision making where it's like we're asking folks to buy on future promise, right? We're showing you things that you can't enjoy today, but if you make a purchase decision today, usually at this lower price, they will be there for you in the future, some indeterminable time. And yes, you can put out deadlines and schedules and stuff like that, but the reality of it is that things happen that are beyond anyone's control. Um, Versus the security of knowing that this facility and this lifestyle option already pre-exists, right? So I think more or less that's what he's talking about. This has been kind of an ongoing issue because of the facilities that are currently there versus the future promise in the area that he's most likely in here if he purchased in 2021. And clearly he had a new home experience based on his depictions here. So let's continue.
But after looking at it, if I could pick the house, the location to the nearest pool, restaurants, then maybe that's an advantage to have a brand new house and I don't have to have a pool at my house. Instead, I've got a pool within walking distance. For me, that was important. The direction of your house. What's north? What's south? What's going to get beat up by the sun? Really, you should know that. It's hot. You want maybe your lanai on the northern side so it gets shade. Maybe you're one who wants toasty year round, you want it on the southern side. Understand the difference between corner lots and interior lots. I'm really flying here because I want to get to the point of how to buy one of these new homes. I was down there visiting, just looking, and the village's realtor took us to a house that just
Village's representative, not a realtor.
went on the market. And all these other people are coming in and they're showing it. And it's like, do you want to buy it right now? And people had already bought it. A lot of times we showed up at the house and it was already sold. But it, but it was a good exercise to know what the houses look like and how close they were and what the positioning and how that, whether we felt good about it or not. The realtor also took us to a house that had been recently built, was in a neighborhood that was already had people in it. Gives you a different feel. It gives you a feel of what is this going to be like when they're not all just homes that are empty and haven't been moved into. That was really a good point to really kind of, it was a good exercise, and I recommend that if you go down there, get a village realtor and have them take you around. Get into a community that's already going. Look at the community pool. Look at where the mailboxes are. Look at those things that you're going to deal with every day. So, buying. Let's go to buying.
Okay. Um, I apologize. We had a little bit of interruption in the recording. So I kind of lost my train of thought there. He's talking very much about his personal preferences and his experience. And all, from what I can tell, all he's really suggesting here is that do your homework, get a feel for, um, a neighborhood that's somewhat still under development versus an established neighborhood. Checking out the facilities. Post 2005, a lot of the facilities are going to be very similar, as they're built on a formula. Um, the the distribution of facilities, lifestyle facilities, in the southern sections as a priority is a little different, than in the central sections and in the northern sections. It's the Villages has been around since, I'm going to say, the 90s, and I recognize that the historic side of the Villages has been around much longer. But I think we can all agree that that was a very different, um, outlook and approach. Really, in the early 90s is when the Villages kind of became this site built, lifestyle focused, uh, 55 and older community. And so, just starting in 1990, you're talking about, as of the time of this recording, 33 years of innovation and expansion and change. And so naturally, every area, every error of construction, every error of development has slight nuance differences, in terms of where the priorities were at that time. Six and seven are being developed with a different set of priorities, as opposed to in a different reinterpretation, of what lifestyle means here in the Villages than previous locations. So a lot of this has to, again, come from his new home perspective. There's nothing wrong with that. He's pretty much right on the money when it comes to, if you're considering a new home, these are more or less the steps that you'd want to take. Are you going to do a home site reservation, and then go through the selection process for construction, however limited or expansive it is at that time? The Villages does go back and forth with this on their new home side, whether or not home site selections are available, and then you get to pick a model that will fit. There's this whole cut and paste system. They used to call it the personalized package program. I'm sure they've changed the name now. Or are you going to go spec, a home that's already built, but it's new, and thus you can just purchase it immediately? There's a couple different paths you can take if you're doing the new home selection. And then, of course, he was talking about orientations and things like that. I've already commented on how we can shoot ourselves in the foot when we get a little too detail oriented. Um, let's go ahead and continue here.
If you need, usually you want to touch and feel and see it all, it's probably not going to work out for you unless you live down there. And that's an option. You can rent somebody else's home that they haven't moved into yet, or somebody who it's off season and they're renting their home. You could rent while you do this process and be there to actually see the home. I didn't have that opportunity.
So let's talk about that for a moment, right? We've made a couple decisions, right? We know the Villages is for us. We've had a couple visits at this point. We know that we are coming to make a purchase, right? We've kind of gone through the planning phase. We understand what we're capable of budget wise. We understand what's important to us home wise. We've more or less locked down our location preference. These conversations have been had with our real estate professionals, whether it be with the village's representative or an MLS realtor, um, and we're here to buy. How much time do we need to allocate to this process? A lot of that is going to have to do with a couple factors. One, what are we seeking out? If we're seeking out something very rare, um, we're probably going to want to allocate a month or two, okay, in terms of securing a rental. If we're seeking out something that's fairly common in the market, some type of entry level designer or a cottage series home or a patio villa. Um, pre 2009 or pre 2017, there was only two floor plans. So it's not terribly complicated when we understand what we're trying to achieve to locate the appropriate buying opportunity, right? It doesn't take that long, usually 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 or 5 with negotiations, assuming that we get it on the first round. Um, so, you're going to want to scale that to your situation. If you are thinking along the terms of, well, I want to secure a rental for a period of time long enough for me to purchase the home and close on the home so that we can then go through the setup phase on the new purchase. Um, there's nothing wrong with that, but I always recommend you kind of have that mindset from the jump when we get to this phase of the purchase. So, just a couple things to bear in mind there. Renting in the villages during certain times of the year is relatively straightforward and simple. During season, this is a different animal. Typically, if you're purchasing during season, you were already renting a home for vacation purposes. So that really doesn't apply in this situation. All right, let's see what else Mr. Abbott has to say here. How far along are we? 11 minutes. Hold on, we're at the halfway point. Okay.
I was down there, and so I did this from far away. And here is how you do it, which people don't really explain. I figured out what kind of home I wanted. I wanted a cottage home. I didn't want a designer home. I didn't want to go out and design. I didn't want a villa. They seemed too small, and I just didn't like how close they were. Some people, that's fine. Next, I looked at layouts, and there was a couple of styles that I liked. You look at some homes that come on the market. They come on the market each day. There are new homes that get posted. They get posted around midnight. So this is important to have the Villages app. This is not something you're going to do on Zillow or Realtor.com. You're looking for a specific home, specific neighborhood. You can sort the homes by that. But once you know what type of home, as they come on at midnight, I looked at my house I bought at midnight. It was there.
So again, this is a strategy for new home purchasing. Um, yeah, see right here, this VNH. This is a new home. If it was a pre-owned home in the village's inventory, it would say VLS. So new release schedules, when a neighborhood comes live, if they're doing a segmented release on a neighborhood, which is more common in the designer series because of how large those neighborhoods tend to be. Um, sure. I mean, I don't know how important it is to you to be up at midnight. It's not like you can place a hold on the home at midnight if it's a spec build. So I guess register that away in the back of your mind.
There with a sketch, no pictures. But the description was the home I wanted. I knew the location. It shows you on a map where it is. It was in walking distance to the pool and rec area and, you know, tennis courts, all of those things were right in the area. But I wasn't next to it, but I was near it. So I called the realtor first thing in the morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I said, hey, I found a listing. I'm interested. Can you show it to me? She went, filmed it, did a walkthrough via the phone, FaceTime, that kind of program. Looked at it. I like the flooring. I like the cabin. The builders were in there putting in the appliances, and they showed me the appliances. I like the appliances. The bedroom, master bath, 2-car garage. I liked it all. So this is what you have to be aware of. So as soon as you say you like it all and you want to buy it, you have 2 hours. You got 2 hours to make that choice. You need to put a deposit.
So what he's talking about here, he's talking about purchasing sight unseen. And here again, this is one of those distinctions between new and pre-owned, right? With pre-owned, you can do a sight unseen a little safer. You can put a clause in there that basically identifies a window of time for you to review the property in person. And it allows you to either elect to proceed with the purchase in the contract, or it allows you to elect to exit the contract and receive your deposit back. That doesn't exist on the new home side. On the new home side, when you go to contract, you put your deposit in. Usually it's a a relatively smaller denomination, 2,500 or something like that. It's changed over the years. Um, and even when I was at Properties of the Villages, I did some new home. I really specialized on the pre-owned side of things. Um, but as I remember, the process was something along the lines of the initial 2,500, and then you had X amount of days to come up with the balance of either 10 or 20%, whatever they were doing at the time on the purchase to solidify the contract. And then you're locked in. With the new home side of things, you don't typically get your deposit back if you fail to perform or you elect not to perform the contract. It's usually reserved or held in a pool. Sometimes, and this is not an expectation that they would necessarily want set, sometimes that can be applied to a different purchase that has happened, where you started off contractually going after one, and then something else came along that fit you better, and you decided that you wanted to go over there, so you broke out of this contract, and then you were allowed to move your deposit from that contract over to another contract, but that's only if you were staying inside Properties of the Villages purchasing mechanisms there. So all that being said, um, pre-owned has a little bit more flexibility on this. Purchasing sight unseen has inherent risks. And I've been a big proponent of this for pretty much my entire career. When you walk into a home, you can feel the space. You can get a more solid impression. I understand the the want to use the technological advances that we have with being able to FaceTime and being able to Zoom and all that type of stuff. But the reality of it is that that camera eye can distort, right? Angles and shadows and just the general feel of the space. Um, so when you are going to engage with this, and this is very common practice when, particularly if you're looking for something unique and it comes up and you're not here and you can't get here in a timely manner, um, you don't want to miss that opportunity. So risk mitigation is a consideration here. I always recommend that you provide yourself with the opportunity to actually step foot into that property and make that decision as soon as possible. But some folks, like Mr. Abbott here, are very comfortable doing this. Everybody has different risk tolerance. So let's jump back in here.
Sit down. The realtor can write up the paperwork. I would say within 24 hours, you need to send a check, and a sizable check, to lock it in. So you really need to make sure you know what you're doing on the financial side. The other piece that's really important is buying a house like this, they give you 30 days to close. Now, you don't get to talk back and forth and say, oh, I'd like to do it 2 months from now, 3 months from now. Nope, 30 days. If you want to do it longer, they charge you a surcharge every day. So
Yeah. So this is really going to fall into the pros and cons, right? New versus pre-owned. A lot of times we engage this conversation the notion of pre-existing enhancements. Um, on the new home side, it's more about um, warranty. It's more about the fact that it's new and never lived in, and so you kind of I always approach new home as like a blank canvas that you then, as the artist, get to come in and put your personal touches and desires within the home to reflect. They're oftentimes built with the minimum installed materials, with the idea that you're going to tear everything out and personalize it to your own taste. Um, we almost never talk about new versus pre-owned in terms of process, right? On the new home side, there is no negotiating, right? The price is the price. The price is reflective of the seller's ability, in this case, Villages Inc., to dictate the closing schedule. Okay. Um, there's no negotiating anything in this contract. You can't modify not one word. Um, it's a standardized, written by the attorneys for the villages, agreement for the NCHs. So, our new home construction. Um, if you're comfortable with that, fine, right? It's a formalized process. It's pretty straightforward. Um, there's no real guesswork. There's no negotiating. It is what it is. It's not complicated. Um, but you can find yourself in situations that you weren't necessarily prepared for, and I think that's why Mr. Abbott is emphasizing this preparation aspect so much. It is always a good idea if you're coming to the villages for a visit, even if you are not necessarily intending on making a purchase, um, to have $20,000, $30,000 if you have that available. Have that in a place that if an opportunity comes along, if you think there's a chance that you might purchase, even a slight chance, have that money set aside just in case, so that you're not caught off guard and you miss an opportunity, particularly if you're looking for something rather rare and hard to come across. Let's jump back in here.
So it's going to cost you more if you go longer. And I get it. You have other buyers that are going to take it and they're going to turn it over in 30 days. The village's warranty is great as I see it so far. They meet with you when you buy the house, they walk you through, they set up, they tell you who to set up appointments with to check out how your appliances work, how your irrigation system work. But the key thing to this is the key thing I don't think people really get. You need to be looped into that system. I've heard some other YouTubers talk about how they were there golfing and they had picked out a house that was being built that they really wanted because they were in the area and they said, "Oh, I like this one next to this little pond." And the reason they got it is they got a realtor to know this house, this is what I want, the exact location, and they get the phone call in that morning and get 2 hours to lock it in. So you just got to be ready to do that. If you
Prior to being a representative with Properties of the Villages, I was a what was called an SA2. That's a sales assistant, and I was working with my father-in-law. And so the 2 hour thing is a hold. In the system, there's an identification number. You can go in. You as a consumer have an account number, and essentially you can execute a hold that will allow your account number to execute a contract, and take that home out of the inventory. Um, but it's 2 hours at a time, right? You can refresh that hold. I used to be tasked with the uh, just a great use of my time and skills. Every 15 minutes, I had a timer, and sometimes there was every 10 minutes, where I'd have to go back in the system and hit the refresh button to continue that hold. If you don't have the home on hold, you can't execute the contract. The contract department, you just can't move forward because there's a sheet, there's a process in the system that you have to fill out, and it won't allow you to do that if you don't have the home on hold. And that was really installed for fairness purposes because there was a window of time where there was only a little bit of inventory available on the new home side, and there were way more buyers than there was opportunities. And so, as a method to kind of introduce some fairness to the process, holds were created. Um, but I want to push back on this notion that it's just 2 hours. It's not just 2 hours. Um, you can refresh that hold. You can continue that hold indefinitely, provided that you don't get backed up. Another representative doesn't come along with their customer and institute a hold behind you. Um, there are times when it is allowable, and there are times when it was discouraged. That if you had an initial hold and then you got backed up, you could then go in behind that and reinstitute a hold on the rear end. So basically, you can create a window of time by which your customer can purchase that new home selection. Um, it's not as cut as dry as Mr. Abbott is probably aware of, but Mr. Abbott is a consumer. There's no reason that he would have known all that. Um, but just be aware, it's not just 2 hours.
Wait to the end of the day, 90% will be sold. 90%. I saw very few that carried over more than 2 days. Very few that I ever saw that were on the market for 2 days. That's the demand that's already there.
So that's a dangerous expectation. I'm going to go ahead and push back on that. Um, Mr. Abbott bought in 2021 during COVID. Okay, construction was down. People were required to be at home. Um, Getting safety on a job site and preventatives, so that folks could work in this kind of environment was probably a challenge. Um, the reason that you had so much intensity in the purchasing is because folks were required to be at home. A lot of folks were buying bigger houses. And so sections of the country that normally their markets weren't very active all of a sudden sprung to life. A lot of money started moving as a result of those homes being sold, and a lot of that money started flowing into the villages. And with our construction capabilities depressed and our demand rising because new money has now flown in, okay, looking to purchase a home, this drove up demand, and this drove up um, the competitiveness of being able to purchase a home. So I understand better now where Mr. Abbott's impression is coming from because of the time that he bought. That was a very unique situation that really we hadn't seen since 04, 05. All right, let's jump back in here, but it's not the norm. The point is that that's not the norm. 90% of the inventory is not gone by the end of the day. You don't necessarily have to be this on top of it in order to secure a property.
So the trick is get your finances in order, know what you can afford, what you want to do, figure out where you want to be. And I would tell you, being in a new location with everybody else being new, you're going to have a lot in common. And with the new amenities and new restaurants being built, you will be near all of those things. If golf courses are important, where are you next to a golf course? That might be super important. One of the other things to do is not only do the aerial, the view on their map, take out Google. You're not going to see the houses because they are built really, really quick. But do a Google Earth shot to kind of see the area. Know if you're next to a highway, a major roadway. Just check all those things out before you make that decision. I really think if you look into it and you're ready to go and you know that's where you want to go.
Yeah, Mr. Abbott bought in the southern sections of the community. It's a very specific example he gave in terms of getting an aerial impression of the surrounding area.
Well, then you just go ahead and do it. You just say, okay, this works. I think the normal procedure that most people are used to, they're going to miss the opportunities. Now, the lower price homes probably move quicker because a lot of people look at those as second homes. And I think if you understand that too, If it is your second home, it's not as low interest rate if you decide to borrow. It's going to be higher than a primary home. So just keep those things in mind. There's a lot of little hidden things that come up in the sense of if you need to borrow.
We know that we're going to be securing a mortgage. And I talk about things in terms of a process because there's different steps, there's different phases, right? We're coming for a visit, uh, we're getting an impression, we're doing our discovery, we're getting our education, we're formulating an opinion. At some point, we're going to shift phases and we're going to make a decision that the villages is for us. Okay. From there, we should be going into the planning phase and really spending time with our agent, realtor and or representative and or both, um, to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what is important. At some point in this planning phase, we need to get in front of a mortgage professional if we're going to think if we're thinking that we're going to be doing a mortgage, right? It's important that we get that process and that conversation happening early because there are elements that may come out of that conversation that very much change the dynamics of what we're capable of doing on the purchasing side in terms of a product, right? A home. So wanna make sure that we're getting in front of the right people to have the right conversations.
And those are things you need to weigh ahead of time. You really need to get a handle at it. And I'm going to tell you this: don't go by these internet rates because it's always a low ball situation. By the time you get into it, it's never the rate; it's much higher, and it's usually pretty close to some other bank telling you what those rates are. So I'm just caution. Yeah, I fell for the whole online zippity doodah has a super low rate. No, they don't. So that's how I bought my house in the villages.
Beware the asterisks. Always beware the asterisks in the tiny little print.
And I think it works that way. People who have the drive to go ahead and purchase there, they understand the system, or you have a great realtor that really understands everything you're looking for. Now, if you want a pool and other stuff, I say go designer home. Have it all done by the builder.
We'll go ahead and wrap up here. I think we got the meat and potatoes on this one. I really, like I said before, I really appreciate Mr. Abbott. And basically, what he's doing is he's just kind of sharing his experience and what he's discovered about the process. Um, hopefully, hopefully he continues to be happy with his choices. I think he will be. I think he had a pretty solid experience. It sounds very reminiscent of what I expect from a new home purchase experience. This has been Realtor Reacts. We got into some. I really love this series because I pre-watched the first maybe 2-3 minutes of this. I had no idea we were going to get this deep into this many topics as it came to the buying process. And I didn't know that his outlook and perspective was mostly from a new home purchasing perspective. So this is not something that I would have dived into otherwise here on the internet. So hopefully we were able to derive some value from this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments if you have any. I'm sure there's going to be some questions to come out of this particular video. We dived into a lot of things here. So hey, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us once again here at Realtor Reacts. My name is Christopher, as you've probably deduced. If you need anything, if you have any questions, if you just even just want an opinion, feel free to reach out. You're going to get my wife, Christine. She manages all of my inbound calls, but I'm pretty good about getting back with you in a timely manner. Um, have a great day. Take care of yourself. Take care of those that you love.